Hey everybody, this is the Brothers Wisp number 49. This is going to be a close, personal podcast this week. It's just going to be myself, Greg Soul, here in Texas, the motherland, and I've got Tomas Kernak. He's over in Slovakia.
Hello, everyone.
Right back at you, kid. All right, so this week is going to be a little bit different. Instead of doing just a bunch of news-related stuff and then a little bit of here and there, I figured I would just grill Thomas on random topics that he's not aware of, and we'll just kind of see where it goes. I like these wandering, meandering sort of free form podcasts. This is like interpretive dance version of podcast.
No assurances of quality of this one, guys.
Excellent. It's the way I like it. Surprise me. All right. So I got a question the other day, and it always kind of makes my face kind of contort in on itself. But somebody said, hey, can you help me set up a mesh network? All right. And so whenever I hear mesh network, I always think, so why would you do that? There's so many better ways of doing things, right? And I guess there's probably going to be use cases where a mesh network does make sense, right? And it's advantageous to do that. But it seems like most situations, I don't know. There's a better way of doing it with higher throughput and all those things. So Tomas Kernak, I'm coming to you and saying, I want a mesh network. What are you going to say to me about that? Do you do mesh networks? Have you done mesh networks? Are you a proponent?
So, yeah, the first thing I would try to do is explain why that's not a good idea. I mean, we've done mesh networks very far in the past, not any recently. I mean, the only use case, I guess, that I can think of where it would make sense if you have a really low bandwidth requirements. That's the only use case where I would say it's acceptable to do a mesh network these days. But I would just say don't.
All right. So in your opinion, low bandwidth as in what, like 5 megs? Like all you need is 5 megabits?
Oh, I wouldn't even do that. Like 5 megs, I think is. I mean, I'm not saying it's not doable. I just think it's not a good idea. I would say if you have devices like machine-to-machine communication or some automation or industrial stuff that require throughput in the range of hundreds of kilobytes, then sure. But 5 megabytes like per station, I don't think is a good idea. If it's 5 megabytes across the entire mesh, then yeah, sure.
Okay. So normally when I think of mesh and MikroTik, I haven't done it in a long time either. I'm not going to lie. But the last time I did it with, I think, WDS. Is that
Yeah,
still?
so there's multiple options in MikroTik how to do mesh. Yeah, generally, of course, you will need to use WDS, so VDS. And then on top of VDS, you have two options which you can run. You can either bridge it and run spanning tree, or run the MikroTik proprietary mesh interface, which is actually a layer 2 routing protocol.
Okay. And didn't they, I mean, in the last 3 years, didn't they overhaul that protocol, or am I crazy? Or is it the same ancient one?
Oh, I don't know about that from memory.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think so.
I don't use it
I
enough.
think mesh hasn't been like touched in a long time.
I guess what's the dream of mesh, right? So say I've got an Ethernet cable that I've got my network connection right here, and I plug it into the first radio, and then everything else magically finds each other and just propagates. All I have to do is go around plugging in radios. I mean, that's the dream, right?
Oh, I mean, you could argue that you get better redundancy because of the massive multi-pathing that you can get with meshing. But then again, from the station point of view, from the client point of view, if you don't have proper roaming, what's the benefit of having 25 SSIDs broadcasting on the same frequency, different APs, obviously. But if the client-side roaming is not properly implemented, then you will still not see that much of a benefit. I mean, yes, you add redundancy, but there are drawbacks on like running everything on the same frequency and halving throughput for every single hop in the mesh that you have to pay for that high redundancy and the lack of physical connections that you make.
Okay, so say I'm a small integrator, and whenever I go into, say, a high scale home, maybe, or I don't know, maybe you're doing Wi-Fi installs in restaurants or something like that, and you just need to add a couple of more APs, would you say mesh is solid for that, or even then, just the loss of throughput?
Don't mesh.
Stop being cheap and run the extra cable. Is what you're basically
No,
saying?
if you think about it, right? If you think about restaurants, what is, or even hotels even more so.
Oh yeah.
What is the first thing that people complain about when it's bad? It's the Wi-Fi, it's the internet, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you do it in mesh and suddenly you have many customers who have bad experience, well, guess what? That's now affecting your business. It's not just a technology decision. It's very much a business and a PR, so to say, decision to have proper networking, proper Wi-Fi, proper functional internet access for all of your devices in that network. And mesh impacts that customer experience, that customer feeling that they get very much.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking from like an administrative burden. I mean, trying to troubleshoot a mesh network can be pretty difficult.
Oh yeah, it's a nightmare.
Yeah, so save yourself the headache. Well, I mean, to me, when people are, at least the limited scenarios I've run into, if it's in one facility, they're just trying to forego running all the cabling like they should. They just don't want to run extra Ethernet cable, or it's a difficult location to get to. So they're just trying to save a few bones up front. When in the end, they're going to just... Go ahead.
Let's be realistic, right? How much of bandwidth are you going to get in a dense Wi-Fi environment, right? AC is not that useful. You will not be able to use 160, 80 megahertz channels. Those are gone, right?
Yeah.
You will be running everything on 20 megahertz to have the least interference you can. So realistically, you can expect realistic 200 megabit on AC of real throughput per access point. If even that, I mean, the more stations you have, the more collisions, etc., right? And what is that in today's bandwidth needs, right? And what is that into the future even, right? Today, 10 gigabit Ethernet for your backbone, even in hotels, is completely standard thing, right? So think about how much future proofing you are not doing by not doing this deploy properly.
Fair enough. No,
it's entirely possible that in a couple of years they will have to redo it yet again because of just lack of throughput.
Yeah. Might as well do it right the first time. Be done with it.
Oh, yeah.
All right. I guess that puts that one to bed. That was just something that every now and then, from time to time, it'll pop up. And I've never really had a good solid answer. I mean, people, for some reason in their head, they want to do it. And sometimes you just can't talk them out of it for whatever reason.
I think it's a problem that actually requires a lot of knowledge, right? Virus, I think, is still such a great gray area to so many networking people. Of course, outside of the WISP industry, right? The WISP industry, we are much better educated at the wireless side of things. But when you talk to like normal network administrators, network engineers that operate like your enterprise networks or your small, medium business networks, wireless is just complete magic to them. They don't understand, right? And understanding everything and all of the various things and difficulties and just all of the technology that goes into wireless, it can be really hard, especially if we are trying to explain why meshing is such a bad idea. There is so many concepts behind it that need to be understood, which people often don't, that it can be hard to explain it.
I can say that in so many facets of my life, though. I'll learn
just
enough to be dangerous.
So true.
Just enough to get it done, and then I'm moving on to the next 20 things. I'm so bad about that. Or a temporary fix is the most permanent solution. If I can just Band-Aid
there is no temporary fixes, right? The temporary fix pretty much always turns permanent.
Yeah, a temporary fix usually just means I fixed it really quick instead of I fixed it really slow and it looks pretty. Yeah, it's usually the difference for me. Something else that I have heard and wanted to sort of ask you a little bit more detail on is people like your MUM presentation that you've done on the automation, just that large scale automation project you did where I think it was somewhere around 1,500 microticks. Was it purely microticks that you're doing administration?
Yeah, pure microticks,
okay,
about
so nothing
1,500. I think it's a bit more now, actually.
All right. So say it's starting anyways, 1,500. You did that automation. I loved how you did the math breakdown where you just said, each device, if you want to do a simple task like upgrade the firmware, each device is going to cost you X number of minutes per device, multiply that by the total number, and then factor in a failure, a human error correction sort of piece. You're going to fail on this many, like people-wise, or I guess that comes down to just regular configuration updates, right? If you're just pushing, say you're pushing new firewall rules to every person, if an actual human's doing it manually, there's going to be some amount of, human mistakes associated with that. And so you have to factor that into how long it's going to take you, right? Because you're going to have to troubleshoot that, figure out, come back, fix it. And so I think whenever you look at it like that, it's a no-brainer, on the cost-wise. But I think so many people are just baffled when it comes to automation. They have no idea where to even begin to really research this stuff. It's like, how do you, most folks want a way to dip their toe in, right? Just to figure something out, to play with it a little bit. If somebody, let's say they have limited programming skills. Let's start like this. Let's say you have no programming skills. Do you know of any way that you could begin to implement some automation with zero programming understanding, right? Because there's going to be a lot of folks that are WISP owner operators that really, maybe they're a bit of server guys, or maybe they're pure networking guys, and they just don't have that scripting automation sort of experience. Where would you suggest they start? Or even, do you know of a place where a complete beginner could start?
So I think there is actually a big difference even between the starting points. And the difference is if you know, or if you ever worked with Linux, or if you are purely a Windows guy. If you are a Windows guy, I guess what you could start with to at least do something and slowly introduce yourself to how to do it is start with some very basic plink integration. Plink is a command line interaction tool from the same guys that did PuTTY. So you can start by doing some really basic plink stuff. Try to scrape some output, just get an output of show version, or a system router board print, or something similar, right? Then you will most probably want to move to Linux. I will not lie, just so much of the automation is so much easier on Linux, at least for a beginner. Later on, I personally, as people who've heard my presentations and talks know, I'm a big proponent of Java. I really like Java. I like writing code in it. I like running it, since it runs on any platform. So actually, when you get to a point where you can write some really good cross-platform code, even in Python or in Java, the operating system doesn't matter so much anymore, but that's at a much later point. So if you are a Linux guy, or if you are a Windows guy who has gone through the plink phase and knows some stuff, you will want to move to Linux. And then probably the easiest way is actually just to start with like vanilla expect scripts. Writing an expect script is actually really easy. So what is expect? Expect is I guess it's an extension to the TCL language. TCL, or some people like to call it Tickle. TCL is basically, I don't like calling it Tickle, it's TCL. so TCL is basically, it's a shell, just like Bash. Actually, it's a native Linux shell. I dare to say all of Linux and Unix systems actually have TCL already from out of the box. And you can write TCL scripts, and as a part of TCL, you can actually use expect. And expect is really easy to work with. What it's not so good at is documentation. But if you just Google TCL manual, there is a really nice, the man pages are okay, but let's be honest, it's much better if you just Google for it, and there is a nice interactive HTML TCL expect manual. And you can write really powerful stuff in 10 lines of code, honestly. Like SSH to a MikroTik, scrape the output of system router board print and do something, or just send system packages check for updates, etc., etc. You can do all of that in 10 lines of expect code, and just start building from there. Play with expect. It's really easy, really fast to do stuff in. It's, of course, also really easy and fast to do mistakes in, and to do crappy stuff in. But that's okay. and just keep going from there. Some people really like Python, and you can do wonderful things with NetMiko and Paramiko Python libraries, and expect there is a Python variant of expect. I personally don't really like Python much. I like Java so much more, so I can just recommend Java, JShell, and expect it. And that's like the high level where you can pretty much do almost anything you want with those.
Okay. So how about something that kind of wraps everything together, like Puppet, right? For example, is an automation system, but I'm not going to say the problem, but kind of the issue here is that Puppet requires you to install an agent on every device, right? That Puppet's going to control autonomously. Wherein something like Ansible, if you use Ansible framework, and I think that's made by Red Hat. Actually, I know it's made by Red Hat because I got a friend that's on the Ansible team who keeps telling me I need to play with Ansible. And before, when I was just thinking of this question to ask you, I actually just did a quick Google for Ansible and MikroTik, and it looks like people have written, I'm not sure what you call them, like recipes or whatever. So Ansible will be able to just communicate directly with your MikroTik.
How that works, it's a bit different. So Ansible actually uses Napalm in the backend, and Napalm has modules or integrations for various network operating system, right? Cisco, Juniper, MikroTik, etc. And a lot of people will probably hate me for this, but I don't much like Napalm. It's just, I find it's flexible and faster to actually write like native Java and expect code. And this might be, of course, simply due to the amount of experience that I have with automation at this point, and to how I prefer the flexibility of raw automation code, so to say, other than like some library as Napalm, which forces you into the constraints of that library, of that framework. Right, and Ansible is, don't take this as me saying Ansible is bad or Napalm is bad, or don't use Ansible or Napalm. Just proper tools for proper jobs. And personally, I think if you are going to write like a custom automation system, and let's be honest, in the end, every automation system will have some things that are similar between them, because it's an automation system, right? There is not that many ways to write it, but the use cases that you will be using it for and the purposes of that automation will be different. And I personally, from my experience, from my projects, just going from scratch has always been, in the end, the better choice, because like the actual targets of the project, the goals of the projects will change over time. There will be so much of stuff that you will have to implement that you didn't know at the beginning you have to do. Managers want more stuff, or a half a year down the line you have to expand it by this functionality and this one, and suddenly you run into the limitations of the framework or the library you are using. And I'm not saying like Napalm has some hard limitations that you will hit, but as I said, it might entirely be due to all the experience that I've had to this point, but I just prefer not to use an automation library such as that. And this might not be for everyone. That's the answer that I've come to myself through my projects. But for other people, like Ansible might be entirely fine for their use case.
Well, I've only ever met one Tomas Kernak, so not everybody's got the capabilities and skills and dedication to perfection that you do, I should say. You're the Slovakian Robot. Slovakian
Robot.
Too
much credit.
That's what I keep telling people after your presentations. I'm like, yeah, he's Slovakian Robot. Like, Jesus, that guy. I'm like, yeah, he's that guy. But like thinking of like Ansible, what I think about is like, what if it can accomplish 95%, or say 98%, somewhere in that range of what I want done. But then it's, because it's also got the Ansible Tower, which is a GUI that supposedly makes things somewhat easy, or I don't know.
I would say it depends for what purpose and for what users you are writing the automation system. For example, for that project that I did, like the users of that system are not network admins, not network engineers. They are actually people who don't know anything about networking, right? So they just have a couple of buttons on the dashboard that say provision router, reboot router, upgrade router OS, etc., etc. And you won't be able to do that with Ansible. You won't be able to make a nice one-click dashboard. You won't be able to make something that a person that doesn't know networking, doesn't know programming, doesn't know Ansible itself will be able to use. Because Ansible is for a different use case, right? It's for people that actually know how to work with Ansible, know how to work with the framework, know how to write the code, know how to write those individual manifests, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. So it's for a very different use case.
Well, I think to that end, to speak to that a little bit, is my friend Jimmy is on the Tiger team for Ansible. So basically what he does is he goes in and he makes proof of concepts. So if you say you need to be able to do these things, he'll actually build that and then show it to you. So
I'm not saying it cannot be done.
I was going to say, I was talking to him about it, and he was saying that one of the things he does is just that. So I can't remember all the nomenclature. I'm still so new to this stuff. But he was saying that you can basically create like these forms, and you just kind of type a little bit in the form and click submit, and it will go out and do all of that. But see, in the end, you have to have somebody knowledgeable enough to create these forms, right? So they're knowledgeable enough on the Ansible system. So, you know what I mean? You're still having to put work into it. There still has to be some kind of knowledge you have to gain. You have to still develop, right? But I think to some extent it's lesser than that. And then also, if you're doing Ansible, you could probably find Ansible consultants that could build all that stuff for you, but you could also find somebody that would just scratch build another. I don't know, right? So it's like 6 or 1/2 a dozen or another, you know, it's like which route sort of ends up being better.
Yeah, like with everything else, right? You have to compare your available options, evaluate upsides and downsides to each option, and etc. You know, do you have people that know Ansible, or do you have people that know Python and Java? Right, and so there is many options. I'm not saying Ansible is bad.
Oh no, well, I'm also thinking that most of the people listening to this don't know either of those things. So you know, and I also think, well, if you learn Ansible and you can get it to do your network infrastructure, you can also use it on your server side. But to be honest with you, most of the WISPs, most of the guys that are going to listen to this, don't really have a huge server infrastructure that they could really gain anything from with automation. I think, you know, I mean, they're not reproducing machines over and over where these repetitive tasks can be done for.
Another thing that I've noticed is that if you actually like dig yourself into a framework and you start using it to its limits, you know, you start doing everything that the framework is doing, in the end, it's actually either way, it's beneficial to know those like low-level automation things. How does this work? How does it connect? You know, what's expect, etc. Because sooner or later, you will run into that one custom thing you really need to do that your framework is not letting you, or you will run into that one bug that you need to solve for it to do what you want it to do. And then, you know, those low-level things, that low-level programming, the basics of code flow and algorithms and all of that, you will require it anyway, or of course you always can hire someone and pay someone to do that. But I think like knowing the basics of scripting and automation will not hurt you. It will be beneficial sooner or later.
Yeah, case in point would be, you were talking about Unimus the other day about how I think SSH wasn't working for this one specific thing, and it turns out the way that if you telnet into the SSH port, it wasn't responding in like the RFC method that it's supposed to.
Oh, yes. So there's actually so much that I've learned about SSH by working on Unimus. It's ridiculous because you use it every day, like SSH, right? It's not that hard, but there is so many things to it. It's so many options that you didn't know existed, right? What are SSH channels, right? I never knew before. How does the protocol work on the back end? You know, how is the negotiation of all the different security algorithms that it uses work on the backend, and all of that, like really interesting stuff with TTIs, assignment of virtual terminals, terminal emulation standards, and all of that. It's I mean, I didn't need it until I needed it, right? But actually, now that I know it and now that I understand it, I can imagine so many greater possibilities and so much more that I can do with this in my normal life that before I just didn't understand and didn't even know it existed. So I think overall, it's still useful. Of course, useful for me might not be something that's useful for everyone. And of course, there's been a lot of time investment that I had to put into that and learning and testing and just banging my head against the wall to be able to figure it out, right? That I completely understand nobody or not everybody has all the time and all that, available resources to put into that. So it's always a question of, do you need it and do you have the time? Do you want to know it, etc., etc.
I think a lot of it is, do they have the tenacity? Because I don't know, you're like a different kind of guy. You're on a different level, and I think a lot of people, I don't know, they don't want to invest that much of themselves into it. I know I'm too lazy too. That's why I'm looking at a framework as opposed to trying to roll it from scratch.
And it might not be a bad solution for you, right?
Yes.
It might entirely turn out to be the right and valid solution for you.
Well, and I'm also trying to think, like, what can outlive me, right? If I custom write a piece of software and I leave that company, or say I hire a guy in and he custom writes this, if he leaves, how am I going to pick up from that? It's going to be somewhat difficult. You are like the owner of all the organizations. Well, no, you're not, because that 1500 user system, that was a big system that you provide. Anyway, I'm just trying to think of kind of more on the smaller micro scale. Maybe that's not
sadly,
survivable beyond me.
I think sadly that's still the case with these automation frameworks even today. There is so little people that know Puppet, that know Ansible, that know Napalm, that I think currently in the current ecosystem, you will still be that one guy, the only guy that knows it in the company anyway.
Gotcha.
And of course, that could change into the future. And yes, it's a valid argument that you are future-proofing better by using this particular framework. But as we all know, frameworks also change over time, and frameworks come and go. And I completely understand, the argument that it's better to do it in a standardized framework. It's a true argument, but how much validity and merit there is to that, and how will it hold over time? That's a.
Let's think of it from, like, if you're like a two-man shop, the odds of you being able to quickly find a solution on Ansible, right? I can probably go and find a consultant. I can find somebody to help me with this Ansible problem versus, hey, I had a guy that custom wrote all this crazy stuff, trying to find somebody to help dig through that and then figure it out. I think it'd be a lot easier to, if you stick, because it's almost like saying, I would rather use MikroTik than going and pulling all these open source packages or trying to get BSD where everything's just config files and everything's manually. Like, I would rather stick to what I feel like is more of a framework than trying to start from scratch and roll your own, like Tom is attempting to do, which there's a lot of heartache. I mean, he's been at it for a couple of months now, and I don't think he's got everything sort of settled down, wherein with a MikroTik, I mean, you could probably knock it out in 5 minutes. It'd probably take me a half hour, but we could still get there pretty quick. And
oh yeah, I agree to that point. Yeah, if the framework does everything it needs to do, and if you don't have the time, and you are sure that you will be able to find the people from the framework easier, then sure.
All right, so let's switch gears because I want to keep you on your toes. Do you have any, if you can, maybe one or two success stories that you could share from Unimus so far? So everybody listening to this should know what Unimus is. It's your automated backup system written in Java for some unknown reason. You love Java. I'm not going to I'm just playing. Don't open that can of worms. I was just curious if you've gotten any feedback from users. I know when you put stuff up on the internet, generally you only hear when people are pissed off at you. You don't hear positive feedback, but have you heard anything, where you've, pulled somebody's butt out of the fire because Unimus saved them, or, just anything like that?
So we've had, I want to say all of our feedback, but I'm sure if I said all of our feedback was positive, then that would immediately not become true. So the vast majority of our feedback has been very positive so far. People really like how easy it is to use, how fast it is to use, how nice it is, and it works on everything since it's browser-based. So from that perspective, yeah, of course, we've had bugs like any other software. So those are being fixed as soon as possible. But yeah, majority of the feedback has been positive, and yes, quite a few people have told me that indeed it has saved them many hours of time recovering and saved them a lot of headache. Even actually at the US mom, I had a couple of people to come to me. Yeah, we used it just yesterday to recover a router. So I don't want to name anybody like specifically, but we've had multiple people telling us that they saved various different devices across their network, and they are very, very happy being able to see who did what and when,
That's killer. That's awesome, man. That's cool. Speaking of that, I got a message from a guy, and I don't think I've ever met him, but his name, and I'm going to butcher this, I think he's from the UK. It's Alasdair MacLeod. He said that he reported some bugs to you on Unimus, and then he said that you had them fixed within like a couple of hours or something like that. You're super responsive. He thought that was really cool. He also gave a shout out to Mike and Wilson, saying that they've helped him with some DNS stuff and just junk like that. So he wanted to give a shout out. So he definitely wanted to point out how responsive you are on the Unimus stuff.
I mean, I think every company should be like that. And I know it's not easy for big shops, and enterprises that have hundreds of employees and so many different procedures and protocols that they have to follow, etc. And the huge products which are written in ancient languages and ancient frameworks. But I think any modern, decent, like small-time startup software company should be really responsive and should just answer emails immediately and fix bugs immediately. It shouldn't be that hard. You don't need to rewrite half of the application to fix a single bug, right? So, I mean, I try to hold us as a company to those standards as well. The other guys that work with this on me, if there is a bug, it's also about notifications, right? Anytime somebody posts on our forums, we immediately, all of us get notified and all that. And I understand that's not scalable for big companies, but we are a small startup, and I think just that's the way to do it, right? It makes customers happy, it makes our clients happy. If there is a bug, usually we have a fix within a couple of hours, and we send an updated build to the guy that was affected by the bug pretty much immediately as soon as we fix it. And I mean, I just try to do it the way that I wish when I find a bug in other software, or when I want some information out of some other software vendors. I wish that's the way they reacted, so we just try to do it that way.
So what I heard is the dream is that you'll get so big that you could ignore all your users. Is that how
No, never. No,
I've made it.
There is crazy technologies these days, and I saw some of this. I went to a AWS, Amazon Web Services conference last year, and there is software companies out there now that receive, I think it was like up to 5,000 tweets a day, and they have AI, so they have built AI recognition patterns on those tweets, and they actually run out on every single tweet that comes into their account. They run an AI recognition algorithm that determines if the tweet is actionable. If it is actionable, it automatically gets sent to like a contact representative then he has to reply to that tweet, but it's immediate. And it's that other way around, that there is not somebody checking Twitter all of the time and checking Facebook all of the time, but rather like contact employees get notified by the system when there is their presence required, or some tweet or message. And that way, even big companies can answer their customers in minutes, literally. So I think it's entirely possible, even in like big enterprises, to properly have that chain of communication with their user base and their customer base, and listen to feedback and help people with questions and bugs. I think it's entirely doable, even in large companies. They just have to care about their customers, which sadly so many don't.
Well, I don't know. As soon as you become a public company and you have shareholders, I guess your number one focus is on them, and then everything else kind of cycles down.
It doesn't work that way, right? The money comes not from the shareholders, but from the customers. So the customers should be a priority. And maybe I'm completely delusional, and that's not how businesses work. I don't know. But so far, that's how we try to do stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're starting out, you're setting a precedent right out of the gate. Like this is our core focus. This is kind of our internal values, the standard we're going to hold ourselves to. And like you said earlier, I think in the cast, nobody's perfect, right? Everybody makes mistakes, but it's realizing those mistakes, owning up to them, and taking care of them in the same way you would want somebody else to take care of yours. I think is, it's weird that you have to say these things, like it's because it's so rare. You virtually never see it, you know. Give people the service you would like to get in these scenarios, and it's crazy. So I deal with universities quite a deal, and it's so odd to me because I deal with their IT departments really, fairly directly a lot of times, and a lot of times the people right up towards the top, in the strange structure those things end up in, and they'll ask me for something, and man, I am Johnny on the spot, or they'll need something done, and I'll give them a very direct timeline, and I'll do good communication, and we'll get it done, and we'll work through it really quick, and then I'll ask them something, and I won't hear anything back for 3 weeks. And this is like after email, calling them, leaving them messages. I finally get them on their cell phone, and it's like, I would have been fired after 2 days if I just ghosted. You know what I mean? It's like, you can't just, so it's just, I don't know. Sometimes it's almost institutionalized into these people. It's like, this is the way we do everything, so you need to follow suit. I don't know. I just like that. Just, it's bizarre to me that that's acceptable and okay for people to do in large organizations that literally make billions of dollars a year, that's okay for them to do that. And just as like a person, how can you do that to somebody else? I don't get that.
I am not saying I am perfect, right? I've pushed also people and projects because of other priorities many times, right? But, we try the best we can do.
Yeah. For me, communication is such a big thing. Like, I tell this to my employees too. It's if you have a task and you can't complete it for whatever reason, that's okay. I'm 100% okay with that. You just need to communicate that to me as quickly as possible. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that it's getting done, and when you're working with other people, you have to be just be very transparent. As soon as something changes, let them know. If you had an ISP that for whatever reason, they dropped your link and then called you 2 minutes later and said, hey, this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. Wouldn't that be like bizarre to you if they screwed something up or if something happened and they proactively said, hey, this thing is going on, this thing is happening. And that is absolutely what we try and do. And I think it's bizarre. It's bizarre to think, going that extra mile is just so unexpected. It like surprises people when you do that.
Imagine, how much happier your customers will be with your service, how it builds the relationship between the business and the customers, right? How it, there's the saying, like keeping a customer is 10 times cheaper than getting a new one, right? So you are building that long-term relationship with the customer. You're promoting, it goes into the business side of things as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of industries, like the data center industry, a good chunk of that business is word of mouth, and it's all based on your reputation. If you just, honestly, you can just never mess up. And I think a lot of WISPs, a lot of guys listening to this, it's probably much the same. A lot of their business is word of mouth. I mean, it's not necessarily a yard sign that's gonna or postcards that's going to sell the service. If one guy talks to another guy, that's so much cheaper than having to build all that marketing. You're exactly right. And people will very quickly say that your service is terrible, and they will share that information with everybody else. So if you're trying to go into a new area, that's really going to hurt you.
Fixing that image is so hard. Once the bad image is established, fixing it is. Yeah.
And what I've seen too, say another WISP is in an area and they do a terrible job, and you try and come into that market to take over from them. I mean, they've already just set the bar that much higher for you to convince people, because you've already given WISPs. I see it. I'm not going to say super common, but it's fairly common where wireless ISPs get a bad name because one player out there just doesn't really care about their network. They'll just be really lackluster service, or you're just very negligent. I've seen people be down for months, literally for months, and they just not super concerned about it. And, if you try and come in there, you've got to combat all of that all those hurt feelings. You got to put band-aids on all those boo-boos, and it's so much work. It's crazy. I don't know. I totally tangented off on that one.
I mean, business is also staying alive. Without having customers, without getting money, none of us would have our jobs. So I think it's just as important as any of the other topics. It might not concern the average networking engineer or a network administrator in an enterprise, but in a WISP world, it's much smaller companies, and I think most of the people listening us to are probably the owners of the WISPs, or that they have built them up themselves over the years. 2-3 guys that So yeah.
Well, I would challenge in an enterprise. So I've been on both sides, and I still do straddle the line. I provide services internally as well as work with customers externally, and I found that if you treat your internal people just like you do your external people, other people will start treating you the exact same way. If you are really fast, if you're Johnny on the spot, if you take care of whatever they need really quickly, you set that expectation that, hey, this is how we do business here. In engineering, this is how we work, and we expect that relationship to come back to us. And more often than not, I've seen it actually work in some places. So
it's a difficult topic, because I've been doing quite a bit in enterprise space as well, and in various other industries that you would consider like enterprise industries. I can't go into specifics because of NDAs. Yeah. But my point is that sadly, so many times in those big corporations, if you are the Johnny on the spot, it just gives you more work, because everybody now knows that you are the guy that will do the work and do it real fast. So they offload their stuff and they're lazy and bum it down to you. And it creates a completely different environment dynamic.
Yeah. That's the difference between you as a single person being Johnny on the spot when everybody else in your department is not, versus top down telling your people, this is how we operate, right? All of us, it's a seamless experience. Very different. I absolutely know what you mean, because I've been there. I've been to that spot where you're the only guy. I had a guy tell me one time, hey, slow your roll, man. The boss isn't here. Slow your roll. So yeah. But I've always, occupationally, it's always been a race with me. I'm not a super competitive guy in real life. I'm apathetic when it comes to that stuff. But in my professional life, I'm very competitive. So I always am going to push harder than the guy next to me. I'm always going to run faster. You know what I mean? So I've always tried to do that. And if, from the top down, that pace isn't set, then that one guy that's pushing harder is going to get so much more work. And a lot of times, it's not very appreciated by other people in the department, right? Because it makes them look bad, or you're trying to make me look bad. And no, I'm not trying to make you look bad. I'm just trying to be better myself. It's slight
sadly,
difference.
in so many corporate and enterprise environments, just the management is so bad. And when you have the management layer completely screwed up and not doing what they should and corrupting the entire hierarchy, it's just a disaster.
I read something one time that said, in IT at least, most people don't quit their jobs, they quit their boss.
Oh, yes, definitely. Their manager and their immediate superior. And
I found that to be extremely true in a lot of scenarios. I mean, I've quit before because, I had gotten a lot of certifications, I had gained a lot of knowledge, and my pay wasn't keeping up track, and so one time I changed jobs and almost doubled my salary, right? And so the management was fine. They were just apathetic. They weren't really catering. Well, I guess I did still leave the management team because they weren't keeping pace with the employees. They weren't taking care of them the way they should have. So I guess it does actually but that was sort of corporate all the way to the top. So I don't know that they really had a lot of control over that. But other than that, kind of the only time I've ever left was really, that management thing. Where I felt like I was forced to leave. Like I had to leave. I had to get out of here. It was just a horrible manager, and I couldn't do it anymore.
Oh, that tangent aside.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, do you have anything else? We've put about 45 minutes with some interesting talk. I think you said you had some new stuff.
Yeah, I had a really interesting case that I want to share this week because it took me a good while to realize what was going on and investigate it. So we have a customer here that's like a small business kind of a customer, about 30 employees. So we provide the entire networking over multiple buildings, some wireless links, some fiber, blah blah blah. Anyway, the point is that the employees have a VPN that they dial into. It's L2TP over IPsec. And reports started coming in about 2 weeks ago that completely randomly, to different accounts, the VPN would simply not work. And random times, random accounts, random users, and just the VPN would not work. So, for one guy, one day it would work, and the other day it wouldn't work, and then the next day it would work again. But on that same day, it wouldn't work for a different user. So that was very interesting. I started going over all the configs, looked at all the logs, looked at everything, SAs were establishing. There was no firewalling issues. Like even SAs were even getting the traffic, right? So you can see in IPsec that particular SA for security association for a non-working user was actually hitting the traffic. So I investigated for quite a bit before I realized what was happening. And so what was the issue? One of the internet providers at this site, which is a PPPoE session up to the internet provider, which assigns a static public IP to this company's router, right, inside of the PPPoE session. But the problem was that on the PPPoE access concentrator side, the provider started assigning an IP address out of a private space. And that IP address conflicted with our VPN pool. But so what was happening, since the VPN addresses were assigned randomly, right, as VPN users were connecting and disconnecting, the conflicting address got assigned to a different VPN every single time. So it was a complete nightmare to track. And since there was actually traffic going around, even in SAs, right, that IP address existed, so the traffic was encrypted but sent on a wrong link, not inside of the L2TP tunnel, but to the actual PPPoE session where the ISP's access concentrator basically overtook the IP address. And that was a nightmare to track.
How did you, what was the catalyst that got you there? How did you notice it ultimately?
Just being completely desperate and looking through everything, and just by random chance, I looked into IP addresses and went through all of the IP addresses, and then the light bulb lit that there is an IP address here on the PPPoE session from the internet provider that should definitely not be there.
So did you fist pump or did you scream some obscenity? Which was it?
No, it was like, what is happening here? Kind of a moment. So, yeah, so we called the provider, and I'll name and shame. It was the Slovak Telecom. It's the national telecom company that was assigning private IP addresses to their PPPoE access concentrator. But what is even weirder is that they have multiple PPPoE access concentrators for their customers, for redundancy and load balancing, and not all of them actually assigned the private IP address, because I tried changing the service name. Because every single of their concentrators has a different service name. So you can actually specify which concentrator you want to connect to if you specify the service name, like PPPoE service name. And if you don't, MikroTik just picks a random one. So we could actually see which. Yeah, the point is that even their access concentrator configs were inconsistent across those access concentrators. So sometimes when the PPPoE session would re-establish to the right concentrator, everything would work for a couple of days. Then the PPPoE session re-established to the wrong one, and then the VPNs would start malfunctioning again. It was just such a mess. Anyway, we called Slovak Telecom, and of course, you call the level 1 support, and you tell them that you have a problem with their PPPoE access concentrator IP address inside of the tunnel being duplicate to a private space that they are using for VPNs, and none of those words mean anything to level 1 support.
Yeah.
So slowly we got escalated to some guy, and of course the answer was that they are not going to fix all of this for one customer which is experiencing issues, so we had to completely readdress our VPN pools, and that was not fun.
How fun. I'm surprised they weren't even using like an carrier grade NAT or anything like
Yes,
that.
so the point of this is, please, everybody listening to this, assign CGN space addresses to your customers. Carrier grade NAT 100.64/00/12, I think it is.
That's so cute.
No, no, it was. Oh,
Well, kudos to
that took
you because
that took so
you
long to track
were
down.
you about 30 minutes away from blowing away the config and then reloading it on the router?
And I even tried rebooting the MikroTik and it didn't help.
But that always works. Come on.
Right, yes, of course, except when it's not the MikroTik's fault. No, I mean, I looked at everything. Like, I went through every single rule in the firewall. I went through every single line of IPsec config. I went through PPP config, so PPP profile, L2TP server, everything. Everything was right. Just, who could have guessed that that was happening?
How fun.
Uh,
Well, I'm surprised. Well, what was the range that they were using?
oh, it's 10, 255, 255, 255.
Wow, that's pretty common. I actually use
Yeah,
that in a couple of different
that's our
spots.
VPN pools. Oh, at all of our customers actually use 10, 255, 255/24.
Yeah, that's actually I use that a lot, like in my configs because it's the very top of the range. So I use that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So that would have screwed me over. Awesome.
So that was not fun.
All right. All right. Well, one last one. Let's close it up. What's your favorite thing you're watching on TV right now?
Oh, that's a hard question. I would say, yeah, Orange is the New Black. The new series was great. I enjoyed it. It was really nice. It was really good social commentary. Really good. It was very good.
I'm assuming since you spent 2-3 years in the States when you were in high school. What was
Yeah,
it?
2 years in high school.
2 years. All right. So there's probably a lot of colloquialisms and sayings that we use that you understand, but I'm assuming there's a fair bit you're seeing on that show that doesn't make any sense to you. Are you catching any of those?
What do you mean? Like, I can understand pretty much everything. Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing they're saying that's surprising to you.
Not really. I mean, I was in Arkansas, so
The
no,
home of
I don't
American
mean that
culture. I get what you're saying.
in any bad way. I actually enjoyed it. It was wonderful 2 years
Yeah.
in high school, but yeah, it was really good. And particularly like the high school that I went into, which was a really big change coming from Slovakia. The high school was 85% black, 10% Hispanic, and 5% white. And I came from Slovakia, which is 99.9% white. So that was a wonderful, great change, and I loved it so much. And
Yeah, that's
yeah,
killer.
just all the cultures mixing and seeing different cultures and different things and different aspects. And yeah, so luckily I understand most of the different like jokes and yeah, colloquialisms and like yeah. It's I really liked it. The fifth season of Orange is the New Black is very nice.
I just started on the new season of Doctor Who. The what is that? The 10th season. So I think they're like 9 episodes in, and I just realized that it just started on. So I'm in one episode in, so I'm enjoying watching it with my kids. They're big fans. They're big Whovians. So I'm gonna keep on keeping on. All right, man. You got anything else you want to put a bow on it?
I think that's it for today.
We beat that horse to death. You got it, brother. All right. So Thomas Kernack, if people want to reach you out on the internet, how are they going to do that?
Yeah, just Google for me, Google my name. You will find me on YouTube, Facebook. You will find me on unimus.net and all of the contacts there. You can email me. Just Google for me, and I'm not that hard to find.
He's around. He gets around. You know what I mean. If you want to find me, you can find me on gregsoul.com, where I very occasionally blog. I've actually put out a couple things recently. Don't get used to it, though. Also, if you want to leave us questions, comments, probably the easiest way to do that is on Facebook, because Mike is like Johnny on the spot. We were talking about Johnny on the spot. This guy is always on Facebook. So the brothers, or rather facebook.com/TheBrothersWISP. You're going to be on there. Any of the new juicy news that comes out, that's pretty much Mike. So you can thank him for that. People say facts are boring and opinions are interesting. You'll find it very interesting, because Mike likes to include a lot of opinion in these things, which I like, actually. For you old schoolers like me, you can hit us at contact us at TheBrothersWISP.com if you want to shoot an email. Other than that, keep listening, comment, suggestions, and thank you, Thomas. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.